When Savannah learned that she was expecting a boy, she and Matthew picked out the perfect name for him, Baby Fabian. Her due date came and went, and no baby. A week passed, and finally she and Matthew scheduled an inducement for 6:30 a.m. on the 23rd.
Savannah was actually a no-show for this appointment. It came out pretty quickly that nobody had actually seen her since 2 p.m. the day before.
On top of that, Matthew was also missing.
So that day, local police officers did a wellness check at Savannah and Matthew's apartment. There were no signs of violence or of forced entry, but also there was no sign of the missing father and mother-to-be.
Of course, Savannah's relatives immediately pointed the finger at Matthew, suggesting that he must have done something to make her miss this appointment. Hopes were completely dashed on December 26th, 3 days after she first went missing. That day, a resident in an apartment complex spotted a gray Kia Altima that was parked in their lot. So now, Savannah and Matthew's disappearance had become big news by this point. So this person immediately recognized that car. They sent a Facebook message to Savannah's sister-in-law, and then Savannah's relatives passed the information along to the police.
And when detectives arrived, they saw someone in the front seat of that parked car, and it was Savannah. The police report says she had trauma to the head, which I'm going to be honest is putting it mildly. She'd been shot execution style behind the ear. She was dead, as was her unborn baby. Fabian never got to live for a single day.
As terrible as all of this was, at least Matthew's family was somewhat vindicated through all of this. They now had evidence that he had nothing to do with Savannah's murder. And unfortunately, that's because he had been killed too. Like Peyton just said, Savannah was in the Kia's front seat, and Matthew was in the back seat. And according to Gloria Cordova, Savannah had Fabian's car seat in her lap.
Both of them had so-called drag marks on their bodies, meaning they probably hadn't been killed in the Altima. More likely, they were shot somewhere else, and then the killer or killers dumped their corpses in the car. There was blood smeared across the back seat, which supported that theory. And while police found shell casings in the Kia, there was no sign of the murder weapon.
So now what had been a missing persons case became a double homicide investigation. I mean, triple if you're considering little baby Fabian at this point. Even while the Soto Cordovas were asking for privacy, the police were still crowdsourcing tips. They described the crime scene where the bodies were found as perplexing. They seemed eager for just about any piece of information that they could get. And just 2 days after they found Savannah and Matthew's bodies, they released a clip of security camera footage that was recorded in that same parking lot where their remains had been found. The footage was only a minute long, but those 60 or so seconds were honestly chilling. It was literally footage of people covering up a double homicide.
The driver's side door of the truck swings open, and a heavy-set man in a white shirt gets out and walks over to the driver's window of the Kia. Then the Altima's door pops open, and the man sort of leans toward the car like he's talking to the driver.
Now, I really want to highlight what happens next because it became very important later in the investigation. This man apparently wraps up his conversation and he turns back toward the truck like he's going to get back in. But then this white towel comes flying out from the inside of the truck and it lands on the edge of the driver's seat.
If you watch the original footage that the police released, this is really hard to see. The truck and the Kia Altima are both parked some distance from the camera, and add that it was dark and the towel was pretty small, it all makes it really hard to see much detail at all.
But there must have been someone in the front passenger seat who tossed it to him.
Either way, the man grabbed the towel and used it to wipe the Kia's door. Presumably, he was trying to clean off any fingerprints or other evidence that might have been on the handle. And while he was cleaning, the driver of the Kia got out for a second. And unfortunately, it's hard to make out any of that person's features.
So at that point, presumably, the two individuals were done with whatever they had planned. The man got back into the truck and the other person got back into the Kia. Then the two vehicles drove off in opposite directions.
So the authorities released this footage and asked the public for tips about the people in the video.
The internet has blown up with people sending tips and people just sending misinformation. There was a lot of misinformation out there.
Apparently, a lot of these misleading tips were allegations against completely innocent people as well. Luckily, the police could clear the falsely accused pretty easily, but still, I mean, it was pretty reckless. It was scary.
On the upside, the detectives weren't exclusively counting on true crime fans. They were conducting their own investigation, most of which they didn't publicize.
So it wasn't common knowledge at the time, but when the investigators discovered Savannah and Matthew's bodies, they also found Savannah's cell phone, which was a goldmine of information. They learned that the night that they went missing, Savannah Googled a certain address on Charlie Chan Drive in San Antonio, Texas. It was just a few blocks away from the parking lot where her body was later discovered. Then, about 10 minutes before midnight that same night, she pinged off of a cell tower in the exact same neighborhood. So it sounds like she was looking up directions to that address, right? And it was a house in a residential neighborhood. And then she drove there. 4 minutes after that ping, her phone traveled to the apartment complex where her and Matthew's bodies were eventually found.
So clearly, Savannah and Matthew encountered someone on or near Charlie Chan Drive who killed them and dumped their bodies right afterward.
Exactly. So the police took a closer look at the people who lived at that particular address. They also set up surveillance cameras. When they reviewed the tapes later, they saw somebody driving a gray Chevy Silverado, just like the one that appeared in that security footage. So they ran the plates, and then they identified the owner. It was Ramon Presidio, a large man who bore a striking similarity to the man driving the truck in the footage. It was a jackpot.
And when investigators knocked on the door, Ramon answered, and it didn't take long for him to confirm the detectives' suspicions. Sergeant Monscaso noted.
They went up, knocked on the door. The first gentleman, the first individual, the father answered the door. He knew why the police were there. Was cooperated fully with the investigation. We're right here to headquarters, and our detectives were able to start interviewing both the son and the father. Again, they were both at the home. They were both brought down here, and the interrogations began.
That was a reference to Ramon and his 19-year-old son, Christopher Preciado, who both agreed to go back to the police station for an interrogation.
There, they each admitted the truth. Christopher had killed Matthew and Savannah. Then he asked Ramon for help covering it up. Ramon drove to that parking lot to wipe the fingerprints off the Kia. Then Christopher rode home with his dad, leaving the Ultima with the bodies in it behind. All of these events, the police showing up at Ramon and Christopher's front door, the interrogation, and the confession, happened on the afternoon of January 3rd, 2024.
It was a pretty busy day, I will say that. And that same evening, the police issued a warrant for Ramon and Christopher's arrest. Christopher was charged with capital murder and other issues related to the abuse and concealment of Savannah and Matthew's bodies. Ramon was only charged in relation to hiding evidence and mishandling the corpses. The police also indicated to reporters that more charges might come down the line later on through their investigation. Now, this, though, didn't stop the authorities from perp walking Christopher and Ramon in handcuffs into their squad cars while the press all watched and just was yelling at them, asking them all sorts of questions.
And for the most part, the two were pretty quiet, even while journalists shouted questions at them. With one exception, when someone asked Ramon if he had any regrets, Ramon answered this.
And I have to say, at first, this sounded like a really weird comment to make. I mean, Ramon and Christopher had already admitted that Christopher killed Savannah and Matthew, and Ramon had helped him hide it. So they were arrested for crimes that they had apparently already admitted they committed. So what's with this sudden new claim that the murder charges were now all fake news?
That may be because while Christopher and Ramon admitted they'd either killed Savannah and Matthew or disposed of their bodies later, they didn't actually confess to murder. In his interrogation, Christopher said he shot Savannah and Matthew in self-defense.
According to Christopher, Matthew and Savannah weren't actually murdered at all. Instead, they died in a shootout that they initiated.
To hear Christopher tell it, the couple came over to his place late on the night of December 21st to sell him some weed. He never had any intention of hurting the pair, but in the midst of the deal, Matthew drew a gun. Christopher says he tried to disarm Matthew and Matthew fought back. Then Christopher manipulated the gun. That's an exact quote from his arrest affidavit. It went off, hitting Savannah. According to Christopher, Matthew aimed the gun at him again, and once more he manipulated the gun and made it discharge again, and this time it hit Matthew.
Now, the problem was that Christopher's testimony just did not at all fit the ballistics evidence. Savannah and Matthew were both shot in the head, right behind the ear. So if Christopher's story was true, that would mean that somehow a pair of accidental discharges both happened to hit them in the exact same place. I think it's safe to say that Christopher's account was probably a self-serving lie. I mean, no, the homicides did not happen that way. Let's just call it what it is.
Still, the police accepted at least part of his testimony. When they announced Christopher and Ramon's arrests, they said that they believed Savannah and Matthew had been killed as a part of a drug deal gone wrong. That doesn't mean that they agreed with Christopher's story about Matthew pulling a gun or the accidental misfires. It's not even clear if Savannah and Matthew were meeting up with Christopher to buy or sell. But it does seem possible that they were involved in a drug deal gone wrong somehow.
This new piece of information was really upsetting to Savannah's brother, Jordan Cordova. As he put it to San Antonio CBS News affiliate, "My nephew Fabian, his mom and dad, they're all gone over marijuana." It's just so senseless when you really take a step back and think about it, not to mention that their brother was murdered over $60 worth of marijuana.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
But some of her relatives reacted differently. Instead of being saddened by the announcement, they just insisted that it couldn't be true. From their perspective, this was just one more false narrative. They said Savannah didn't use drugs. In fact, she was apparently super sensitive to secondhand smoke and couldn't stand to be around a person who was smoking. So how could she sell weed if she was so opposed to even being near it?
On the other hand, Savannah might not have been quite the helpless, innocent bystander that her family described. According to the San Antonio police chief, she actively worked with Matthew selling drugs, which does take all of her family's earlier statements and put them in an entirely different light.
For sure, and that doesn't at all diminish any of Matthew's culpability in the domestic abuse, but it does suggest there was a lot more nuance in their relationship than what her family had reported.
Maybe they weren't aware of everything that Savannah was up to, or maybe they only saw what they wanted to see. Or maybe the police hadn't done adequate investigations and were making false assumptions about the circumstances of her death. After all, there seemed to be some other missteps and mistakes during their work. For example, on the evening of January 5th, when they were taking questions about Ramon and Christopher's arrest, the investigator said that they weren't pursuing any additional suspects, that the father and the son were it, nobody else. Now, this led to a lot of online criticism, because if you remember that video, that clip, it looked like somebody tossed a towel to Ramon from inside the truck.
It looked an awful lot like Ramon and Christopher had a third accomplice, and the investigators were basically announcing that they were not going to look into this final person.
In fact, it sounds like this was just a case where the police didn't want to give up the game before they had all of the information in hand.
There was a lot of information on social media that there was a third individual involved. Our homicide detectives were aware of that. However, we were looking for enough probable cause to make that arrest and to present the best case forward to the DA's office. Today, that happened. They were able to develop enough evidence to charge 47-year-old Mirta Romanos.
As for who the third culprit was, it was Ramon's girlfriend and Christopher's stepmother. Her name was Mirta Romanos.
Investigators questioned Mirta on January 4th, 2024, the day after they arrested Christopher and Ramon. During her interrogation, Mirta claimed that she couldn't remember the night when her boyfriend and stepson were disposing of the bodies. Already pretty suspicious. She said that she thought that she might have been asleep at the time, but again, she couldn't really recall.
But then, police found yet more surveillance footage. I'm not sure if it was from a Ring camera or something else, but it showed Mirta leaving the house with Ramon and getting into that Silverado. The timestamp put this departure shortly before the truck arrived at the parking lot. Then later that same night, they came home, this time with Christopher.
So like Ramon, it seems that Mirda had little to do with the actual murders itself. She just helped her stepson and her boyfriend dispose of Savannah and Matthew's bodies after the fact. But interestingly, the gun that killed them belonged to Mirda. It's not entirely clear, though, how it got into Christopher's hands.
Now, police located the firearm in Mirda's bedroom at the same time they arrested Ramon and Christopher, a room that was locked, and Mirda was the only person who had a key.
Mirda was taken into custody on January 10th, and she was charged with altering, destroying, concealing a human corpse, the abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. And as of now, that's the last major break in this case, at least as of this recording. But it doesn't mean that Savannah and Matthew's stories are over, or that we are done with new discoveries. It's still unclear exactly what went down that made a simple sale turn deadly. Christopher, Ramon, and Mirda still have yet to go to trial, and I'm sure that whenever they go to court, there will be a lot more coming to light, a lot new details shared.